So we are going to move to practical things. I said there's no point in believing in your heart that Jewish people need to hear about Jesus if we don't know how to do it and how to do it effectively. So how to tell Jewish people about Jesus. I think the most important steps in witnessing to Jewish people, the most important thing is that you know the gospel yourself. There's no point trying to share a message that you don't understand and you haven't experienced yourself. And Paul talks about this as being living letters. So do not ever give somebody a piece of paper that says something they haven't already seen written in your life. Otherwise you just look like a bit of a hypocrite. So there's an innate challenge with evangelism. It challenges the essence of us, who we're as people. It lays all of our pretense bare as we stand to proclaim the transforming power of Jesus Christ, not having our lives transformed or continuing to be transformed. And so the other thing to say is, not only do you need to know what the gospel is, but you also need to know what the gospel is not. Now, what do I mean by that? You need to know what the gospel is not. Well, I'll tell you what the gospel is not. The gospel is not the triumph of one culture over another culture. The superiority of English culture over Jewish culture or European culture over any other culture in the world. The gospel is the triumph of the cross of Jesus Christ over sin and its eternal consequences for us. I'll say that to you again. The gospel is the triumph of the cross of Jesus Christ over sin and its eternal consequences for us. So nothing to do about cultural triumphalism, nothing to do with superior or inferior cultures or ethnic groups. So we're to know what the gospel is, first and foremost. Second thing is, if you want to reach the gospel, Jewish people with the gospel of Jesus, don't be anti-Jewish, because it's a message of love. And if you come with hatred and some form of not just superiority but hatred, you're not going to be preaching the gospel. And then don't explain away or excuse anti-Semitism or the Holocaust. You can't say, well, they weren't real Christians. Because I have to tell you that every single camp guard at Auschwitz was a baptised member of a Christian denomination of some sort or other. And you can't say that all of them weren't genuine believers. And then Adolf Hitler wasn't even excommunicated on his death. So what does that say to Jewish people? You can officiate over the murder of 6 million men, women and children because they're Jewish, and your church won't even excommunicate you. So it sends a very, very powerful and disturbing negative message. And so when we reach Jewish people, inevitably, first question that comes up will be the Holocaust and anti-Semitism. It's the number one issue for most people. And we just have to admit the failures of the church. We just have to be completely honest. Don't try to explain it away. And then to more familiar ground, or maybe ground that's more you'd expect more, is that you need to know what the main messianic prophecies are. What are those prophecies that Jesus fulfilled, that identified him uniquely above all Jewish men that have lived for the last 2,000 years or more as being the promised Messiah of Israel? Then we move on to motive. Motive is really important. Why do you want to tell Jewish people about Jesus? Is it out of triumphalism, or that we're right and you're wrong, we've got the truth and you don't have the truth? Are you somehow kind of more uniquely damned than anybody else who's outside of Christ? Or is it that you just want to wash your hands of blood guilt? Right, I've told a Jew I can wash my hands of their blood, they can go to hell and it's not my fault. Is that the motivation? You don't have to feel responsibility? It has to be said. Sometimes we can have pretty impure motives for evangelism, that somehow you can go out, proclaim the gospel like you're shouting the odds at an auction house, and then expect that somehow it's their responsibility now because you shouted some formulaic words. You didn't even try to see whether they understood what you were talking about, but you've let the words come out of your mouth. It's their responsibility. That's not evangelism. Shouting words at people is not evangelism. And so you have to encourage an environment in your own heart, an environment when you're witnessing to people, that people understand what you mean. That it's not good enough for you to know what you mean. Effective gospel communication, you have to make sure that they understand what you mean. And when words cross cultural boundaries, it's like when you take a straight stick and you stick it into a body of water. The stick looks like it's shooting off in a different direction, doesn't it? It's the refraction of the water. And words cross cultural boundaries. they go off in different directions. They mean the opposite. And so for Christians, non-Jewish Christians, there's that hymn, how sweet the name of Jesus sounds in the believer's ear. But in Jewish ears, it doesn't sound very sweet because of what it's associated with in history. And so we have to come with humility. We have to come, as we said earlier on, with the eyes and the heart of Jesus. We can't just be there to just deal with we're no longer guilty of other people's blood or superiority. And it also shouldn't be that you can add a Jew to your denomination and feel pride that you've got somebody from a difficult people group into your church. None of these are the right motive. So we need to have the right gospel. We need to have the right message as well. About 100 years ago, there's a man called Alexander McCall who wrote a book to challenge Jewish people about the gospel. It's called Old Paths. Still read it online. But he put it in a way that I really like. He said, our only wish is that you, the Jewish people, forsake Jewish error and embrace Jewish truth. Is that not nice? We call you to forsake Jewish error and embrace Jewish truth. Because the gospel of Jesus Christ, if it is anything, is Jewish truth. The fulfillment of Israel's hopes and dreams driven by the prophetic visions that God gave Isaiah and Jeremiah and Ezekiel and all these wonderful men of God. So we need spiritual and emotional engagement for the lost. And so the right motivation for us is spiritual compassion for the eternal souls of people. There used to be an old book written called Passion for Souls. Everybody ever read that book, Passion for Souls? And that's what's missing in today's church, a passion for souls. And that would include Jewish souls as well. And so God's given us a command in Romans 1:16. The gospel is first to the Jewish people. And yet for so many Christians, it doesn't even get to the Jewish people last. And so I don't even argue with people, what does to the first to the Jew mean? I said, do you give it to the Jew people at all? And often there really isn't. There's a blank look on their face and it hasn't even occurred to them. So we seek to have the right motivation and have our missionaries have the right drive. We use various methodologies in our mission, international mission to Jewish people, 4 different continents. Most of our missionaries actually are Jewish themselves, not by design, but these are the people that God brought to us. And we use all sorts of methodologies to reach the Jewish people in different language groups and in different parts of the world with this singular message of hope and redemption, driven by the Bible, driven by a call, and driven by the vision that we thought about earlier on today. So you might ask, well, what's the difference between telling Jewish people about Jesus and telling other people, the Gentiles, about Jesus? Well, would you speak to a stranger the same way that you would speak to your mother or the most awkward, unbelieving member of your family? Would you approach them in the same way to share them? You wouldn't. When I was talking to Rachel earlier on about her grandma, can't even talk about spiritual things in her presence. The conversation is closed down. And I guess that all of you have family members like this, right? You just cannot speak to them. So why on earth do Christians think that it would be a successful methodology to just shoot the gospel at Jewish people like a double-barrel shotgun and think that it's going to be working? You wouldn't even do it to your family members. So why would that be an effective methodology in reaching Jewish people? So as we preach the gospel, yes, it will offend, because there is an offence of the gospel. But it doesn't mean that we can be offensive. What is the offence of the gospel? The offence of the gospel is you can't do anything to save yourself. You're lost in your trespasses and sins, and God in his mercy reaches out and saves some of us. Why? Us and not others? Got no idea. I can think of 1,000 people right now that deserve the gospel more than I do. But God reached out and touched me with his gospel, and I'm thankful. And my heart is full of worship and praise. I can't understand why he saved me, but I'm thankful that he did. And I'm driven by that sense of thankfulness, that sense of fortunateness to preach that message to others. And so sharing the gospel is like inviting people to a restaurant. Different cultures have different tastes. What appeals to one person might not appeal to another. Russian and English food is very, very different. Both are nourishing, but they have distinct flavours. And depending on your cultural orientation, you'll either vomit at a plate full of Russian food, or you'll be disgusted at a plate full of English food. So, but it's still food. And likewise, the message of Jesus remains exactly the same, but how we communicate it must be tailored to the cultural background of the audience that we're trying to engage with. Jewish people are often called the Jews or the Jew or Jews, and it's kind of slightly dehumanising. I teach all of my missionaries to talk about Jewish people all the time. And it's easy we want to shorten everything and make it easy. So, and then with the medieval period and the Holocaust, calling somebody a Jew is like an accusation. And so we want to model a way which we think is a more helpful and healthy way of speaking about Jewish people and to Jewish people by including Jewish people. Not a theological abstract, not a political block, but actual human beings who Jesus died to save. And so I try and encourage everybody to talk about Jewish people. Hitler, what did Hitler do? He turns Jewish people into subhumans, then he turned them into a number, and then he hit -6 million, and it was as easy as that. And we don't want Christians to depersonalise Jewish people, so let's think about Jewish people exactly as that, as Jewish people, not a construct or a theological concept that Christians can vigorously and almost unpleasantly disagree with one another about, but see the Jewish people as people that are made in the image and likeness of God, that God died to redeem, and have that hope one day all Israel shall be saved. So when non-Jewish Christians tell Jewish people about Jesus, they're often nervous and outside of their comfort zone, and sometimes can be a bit bad-tempered when Jewish people respond and challenge their faith, because I can guarantee you that the Jewish people won't thank you for sharing your faith. And, oh, thank you so much for telling me the gospel, although occasionally it has happened to me. In fact, just recently, our missionary in the Netherlands, Wim Rachterschot, he had a table in the Jewish area, the Jewish shops, and for years they've told him and Asaf Pelage, who's our other missionary there, we don't want you, go away, they've not been welcome. But just a couple of weeks ago, a Jewish lady called Hadassah came up to him and she goes, listen, I want to thank you for what you're doing here. And Wim was shocked. He goes, well, you know what we do here? She goes, I know. And it doesn't matter what you believe, but you're here and you love us. And that makes all the difference, and I want to thank you for that. And she'd rejected hostile for quite a while. She went off, did her shopping, and then came back and bought 2 Christmas chocolate gifts to give to Asaf and Wim as they're standing there. So it's amazing. So we're living in a slightly different temperature for lots of Jewish people today. And so, but there's another thing I say to Jewish people. Most Jewish people expect that underneath the skin of every Christian is a Nazi waiting to get out. And so they scratch at the surface. And I say, be prepared to be scratched a lot. Because they want to prove their rejection of Jesus is somehow moral or right, because really you're just a Nazi. And so they'll give you a good old scratching. So if you go and do witness to Jewish people, wear thick sleeves, because you're going to get scratched a lot. But it's because they want to prove that, well, I'm totally right and moral and historical to reject Jesus, because after all, and so they give you a little rubbing just to prove that you really are as bad as they expect you to be. But witness to Jewish people will strengthen your faith, it will sharpen your theology if you're willing to do that, because you will have to answer questions you never thought of before. It is an exacting, it's like an intellectual game of tennis. You bounce ideas and arguments one between the other and see what effect your faith has on that person. In particular, how you view them as Jewish people is a big thing. Will you be like Luther, Martin Luther, who loved the Jewish people as the early days of his ministry, wrote a book called Jesus Was a Jew, but when the Jewish people didn't en masse convert to Christianity when his Reformation came, the problem wasn't with him or the church, the problem must be with the Jews, therefore they're cast off, and then he wrote the advice to ban Jews from teaching, ban rabbis, burn their books, and if this solution doesn't suit you, find another solution. And of course the Nazis found another solution, and Kristallnacht, the night of broken glass, was on Martin Luther's birthday, directly to connect with him and his and so the Nazis kind of ideologically tried to connect with him. Now, I don't think Luther had the Holocaust in mind at all, but he greased the wheels of an ideology that was much easier to push through European culture because of the groundwork of anti-Semitic sentiment that had been so prolifically weaved by people like Luther and others. Very unwise use of language, very violent language. You know, violent words breed violent deeds. They don't come from nowhere. And so we have to be really careful how we talk and the kind of language that we learn. We talk. Incredible patience, particularly in first contact kind of evangelism. You know what first contact kind of evangelism is? Public square evangelism, where you've never met them before. So you're giving out leaflets or you're going door to door. This is where you'll meet the angriest and the most vociferous people. They're the ones that will rub you up the wrong way. They're the ones that will say the most offensive things to you. They'll say the things that you've never imagined people would say about Jesus. They'll say it to you, and they're just scratching at you to see the Nazi come out from under you. Never give in to that urge. Always have the compassion and grace of Jesus Christ. Have your words savoured by the Holy Spirit, and know that you're in this moment, and their aggression and their hostility is part of the Holy Spirit working through them, challenging the boundaries of what they think is even possible for a Jewish person to countenance. I mean, for them it's ridiculous, the idea. I should think about Jesus, you're kidding. I'd rather think about Buddha. And that's why most young Israelis, they will travel all over the world to seek spirituality in God, and they won't even put Jesus on a list of possible options, and they will go over and smoke ganja in Goa and go to Thailand and all of these places and go for the weirdest ideas possible. But Jesus on their homeland, Jesus from their people, you know, it's not even a possibility. So we've got to be incredible. That's why I said motive is so important. Not only do you need to know the gospel, why are you doing this? And if you've got the wrong motivation, the wrong heart, it'll come out. And all of that scratching is going to make you react. And you're just going to, you know, you might win the argument, but if you lose the person, it doesn't matter that you won the argument, because we're not here to win arguments. We're here to win people, right? And so, know the gospel is super important. Know why you're preaching the gospel. That's almost more important, because it will invalidate what you think the gospel is if you don't. So I want to think about major objections that Jewish people have and how you'd respond to them. Now, I don't know if some of you may have spoken to Jewish people, but the number one answer you'll get from Jewish people, usually in the UK, on the streets or on the doors, no thanks, I'm Jewish. That is the number one. And I wonder how you'd answer. I remember as a young missionary in Leeds, I met an elderly Orthodox man on the door, and he politely and very friendly said to me, "I'm sorry, I'm Jewish, I'm a Levite. I'm from the tribe of the Levites, the priestly line. I don't need what you're offering, I'm from Aaron's line." And I said, well, that didn't help Aaron's sons, did it? And he took my leaflet. So I do training for all of our missionaries. We have a training course that I developed, and it takes them 2 years to go through. The second part is the Specialist Jewish Christian Apologetics. And they have to... There's what do we have? Something like 16 common Jewish responses. They've got to do an academic paper. And at the end of each paper, they've got to do what I've called a banter response, or a street level response. Something like this. You have to banter back. And if you can make people smile, they're not going to be angry. And, you know, they see missionaries as bad-tempered, uncultured morons. And if you can challenge them that you're not quite as bad a moron as they thought, at least you'd be a moron with a sense of humour, and if you make them smile, then they'll engage with you. You know, so being able to say something like that will help somebody to, oh yeah. Or, you know, if you're Jewish, you're like, oh, what a coincidence, so was I, that doesn't stop me. You know, and Rachel's dad, I used to go around Jerusalem with him, and that'd be his response. You know, not for Jews. He goes, well, it didn't stop me. So, but how would you respond? Has any of you ever had this objection from a Jewish person? What's been your response? Perhaps I can ask you as we go along some of these objections. You can think, and if you've had any experience, you might be willing to share. If not, I'll just move swiftly on. I'll leave a second. Yes. That's right. Her mum-in-law was her atonement for her. Yeah, yeah. But that's the interesting thing is that when people say, no thanks, I'm Jewish, they're usually not there. They don't want an answer. They just want you, get rid of you. Go on, clear off, get off my door, get off my back. That's right. that's the good thing of being on a plane, isn't it? Yeah. So, but for a lot of these objections, what might start off as, I just want to get rid of you, get out of my face, I don't want this conversation. You can, with a bit of skill and a bit of wisdom and a bit of humour, you can turn it and you can make it into a meaningful conversation once you demonstrate that you're not quite what they think you are. One of the greatest challenges, objections that we have is, after the Holocaust in Christian Europe, you've got no moral right to preach to me. And that's a really challenging one. It's sensitive. I would kind of generally remind them the Nazis were driven by Teutonic paganism, and they were as against Christianity as they were against Christianity because Christianity is a Jewish religion. You know that there was something called the German Christian. They were a Nazi Christian denomination. They turned the cross into a swastika, and they de-Judaized the hymn book. They took all references to Zion, Jerusalem, and they sold something like 100,000 copies of this Nazified, de-Judaized hymn book. And then they did the same thing to the New Testament. I joke that they probably only had one page left, and they took all the Jewish bits out of the New Testament. There used to be a church heresy called Marcionism. Not Mar, M-A-R, but M-A-C-I-O-N. The Marcion, he wanted to take all the Jewish bits out of the Bible. And that's what the Nazis did, this ancient heresy. And they de-Judaized the Bible, and they had this de-Judaized New Testament, and they sold, like 100,000 in their first print run as well. And we look today and see the church wanted to de-Judaize. Jesus is not Jewish. Jesus is a Palestinian before he's Jewish. Jesus is everybody and everything apart from who he was born. And, they want to preach a gospel that relates to urban youth. They think that somehow if they make Jesus whoever they're preaching to, that's going to make him relevant. And it really does undercut the historicity of the gospel proclamation. But the other thing I say to them, if a Christian wants to save a Jewish soul, there's no way they want to hurt the Jewish body. And the only real immunisation to the Holocaust would be genuine gospel concern. So, but this kind of breaks my rule in banter. You can't really banter this one. You have to be really meaningful with them. But don't let it put you off. But there is a way to respond to it, or maybe you'd share the testimony of, I don't know if any of you have read Hansie Dobshiner's book, Selected to Live. She was a Jewish believer, ended up living in Glasgow. Selected to Live, her story. There is the Ten Boom story, then there is a number of other testimonies of Holocaust survivors that you can share with them. But that's a challenging one. And a kind of a question that leads on from that, people would say, where was God in the Holocaust? Now, there is something called theodicy. It's where is God when bad things happen? And this is a very specific version of that objection. And I tend to say, well, where was the human race? Where was the human race? When we look at all the tragedies of the world, most of it has been authored and engineered and perpetrated by human beings. And when you boil it all down, not so much as there are natural disasters, but then you could blame the natural disasters on the cause and effect of the human neglect and exploitation of planet Earth. Building in floodplains, building on earthquake zones, building near volcanoes, overexploitation of certain parts of the country causing cataclysmic natural disasters. So, you can have that wider conversation, but then there's real sensitivity you need to hear, because usually second generation of Holocaust survivors tend to be a lot more emotional about what their parents went through. And so if you know somebody who's been through the Holocaust, it's good to tell their story. Just say, well, why do you feel so emotional about it? And listen to what they have to say about what maybe their family member has experienced, and show compassion and love, and show them again that the ideology behind the Holocaust was not Christianity. It wasn't Christian. The Germans were Teutonic pagans. They didn't want Christianity. They wanted to destroy it. And then the other one they say is Jesus is not the Messiah because there's no world peace. Have you ever heard that? Jesus can't be the Messiah, there's no world peace. Where does it say in the Bible that when Messiah comes there's going to be world peace? Where's the one verse that says Messiah will come, then there'll be world peace? Because there isn't one verse. There's not a verse. So, we have what's called the anti-missionaries. The anti-missionaries are a series of big organisations in Israel around the world, and they send people to train in the synagogues how to respond to missionaries. And they come up with questions like this. Dealing with anti-missionaries is like watching a magic trick. You look at a close card magician, yeah? The trick happens before it starts. They lift the two cards. If they've got two cards, you think they've got the bottom card? No, the bottom card's on the top. And so, if you accept the preposition of the question, the objection, you've lost. And so you've got to question the question. You have to interrogate the question. So Jesus is not the Messiah because there's no world peace. Doesn't say that. Doesn't promise that. There is no tight chronology that says when the Messiah comes, then there'll be no more war. Doesn't say that. The closest you can get, you have to extrapolate from Psalm 2. But there isn't one verse that says, and it's like they're saying, well, Jesus never claimed to be the Messiah, so he wasn't the Messiah. Well, if Jesus claimed to be the Messiah, he'd be disqualified from being the Messiah, because rabbinic tradition says, somebody says, hey, I'm the Messiah, immediately means they're not. To be the Messiah, you have to fulfill prophecy. You don't proclaim yourself Messiah, you fulfill prophecy. And that's precisely what Jesus did. And so, question the question, always question the question. So there's nowhere in the Bible that says, step 1, Messiah comes, step 2, there's no more war. It doesn't say that. That's not what's promised. Then you'll have, people will say, well, you don't know Hebrew, you're just mistranslating the Bible, you don't know enough. I met this rabbi in Leeds who was complaining about a tract that I'd been given out and into the doors, and he said that I didn't know any Hebrew, so my opinion was completely invalid. And I told him that I did in fact know Hebrew, and he challenged me, and so I recited the first few verses of Genesis in Hebrew, and he shot back, so you think you know everything, do you? It wasn't really a serious objection, it was to shut me up and get rid of me. And even his anger subsided after the end of that, and we had a great conversation and about a year of correspondence. But that being said, most British Jews that I know will say this thing about the Hebrew in the Bible just to kind of, somehow you're not qualified to speak to me and just try and get rid of you. Jesus is Christ for the Christians, but not Messiah for Jewish people. That's another really common one. But if Jesus isn't the Messiah for Jewish people, how can he be the Christ for Gentiles? Again, this is just another reply to get you off the back. So you have to be able to be ready to respond to these pretty quickly, and just show them that Mashiach is the Hebrew word, means to anoint. When the prophets anointed I'll come to you in a second, when the prophets anointed David to be king, they smeared oil on his forehead, and that was called Mashach, anointed. And so Mashach, the anointed one, becomes Mashiach, and that's translated into Greek as Christos, from whence we get Christ, and then we get Messianic. Christian. No, it's Messianic. The same word, right? Christian and Messianic is the same thing. It's just from two origins. Yes, you wanted to ask a question.
Your objection of 6 million Jews were slaughtered, killed. Have you ever used this argument? World War II, there were 60 or 70 million people killed in that war. And that's tragic. And because of the result of World War II and because of the Holocaust, what I've read, maybe I'm wrong, is Israel became a nation out of the outcry of those 6 million deaths. So an argument might be had is, there's always tragedy, there's always death, there's unjust death, war's unjust death, Holocaust is unjust death, but God redeems. He makes good out of bad, and that's what he did. He brought the nation of Israel, according to his word, and promises back as a country. Have you ever used that argument, or does it work, or does it not work?
I wouldn't use that in a first contact environment.
Not in the first contact.
If I've developed a relationship, absolutely. My experience of meeting Jewish people who have got a problem with the Holocaust, most of them might use it just to get through the back, but it's fed from a really deep emotional place of hurt. And so I tend to just weep. I'll ask them their story, and I'll weep with them, and I'll show regret. But yeah, if I've got a more developed relationship, then I go more into that. But I think Jewish people just want to be heard, sympathised. It's like I mentioned earlier about Jewish people being gaslit, that they're the cause of all of their, because they exist. That's why this happens. There's something innately problematic about them, why the whole world keeps trying to kill them. And to find a Christian who will literally stand there and weep with them is becoming more rare. So I think there is real power in showing compassion at that moment. And then you just see where the conversation develops. And just say, listen, let me tell you why I find the Holocaust an appalling and horrible thing. And then you can go into those arguments. But I think for me, it would be just listen to people's pain, particularly now, where you have people denying it even happened. You know, you have people saying that the Holocaust never happened. Regimes like the Iranian regime said the Holocaust never happened, while actively planning to do a proper second one. You know, so it's madness. So, yes.
Our experience between people in Glasgow is very positive.
Yeah.
I think that maybe because they sense genuine people and not. But I want to ask a question after sharing our life experience. Last October 7th, I went out in Glasgow with a community called the Glasgow Friends Hospital, setting up an ambulance Sunday team. And I went out, I was going to the Rangers game actually, and I had my top on, and I just went over, and I just said, if any of you want to have my coffee, didn't even go to show the Lord, I was going to show love. Right, like the Israeli flag, right around where I put the ice rock, and I just went over and asked them if they wanted me for coffee, and they said, well, we're quite busy, maybe some other time. I said, listen, you couldn't be offended if I gave you that, and I gave them the hospital flag. Now, would that be a good thing to do to Jewish people on a regular basis, or will they be suspicious of me because we're Christian?
Did they take the trucks?
They did take it.
It was a good thing to do then.
And that was in that situation, that was very positive.
Yeah.
But would that happen all the time, or would they be suspicious of me because we're Christian?
Well, they might be suspicious of you because you're a Rangers supporter. That's a hard question to answer because you can't answer for how everybody. I think if you're authentic and you meet people at their point of need and you're positive and friendly to them, of course people are going to have a more, positive reaction to you. I applaud you for that. It's great. I think wearing an Israeli flag is a brave thing to do in today's world. Maybe not so unusual in a Rangers at the Ibrox, but it would be at a Celtic match. So I'll just run through a couple of other ones, another common objections. We mentioned this earlier, Jesus never claimed to be Messiah. And here's the thing, Paul invented a new religion. So they blame Paul. Because Jewish people tend to really like Jesus. My father-in-law used to say Jesus was the greatest Jewish teacher that ever lived. And then he said he was actually the greatest teacher that ever lived. And in the end, before he died, he professed faith, which is a wonderful hope for us. He's buried just outside of Beersheba now. But it's easier to dislike Paul than it is to dislike Jesus. Jesus is a lot more attractive. Paul, everybody thinks, is this hunchback misogynist who kind of destroyed everybody's fun at church. But Jesus also interestingly used. What was Jesus' own nickname for himself? He talked about not Messiah, but he talks about Son of Man. That's right, from Daniel 7. And that was a very, very powerful. And all the major rabbinic commentaries actually say Son of Man, and Daniel 7 is about the Melech Mashiach, about King Messiah. So non-Christian rabbinic authorities say that this is about Messiah. It's a powerful thing. So the other thing we have in our heart, we tend to think the Jewish people are the people of the book. By that we mean the Bible, the Old Testament, the Tanakh, as it's called in Hebrew. Tanakh is an acronym. An acronym takes the first letter of each word and turns it into a word itself. So you have Torah, Nevi'im, Ketuvim. Torah is the 5 books of Moses, that's the T. Nevi'im is the prophets, Tanakh. And then Ketuvim, which is the writing, so you've got the poetic and the prophetic books. That's the 3 divisions of the Old Testament. So you've got Tanakh. So that's the Hebrew word for the Old Testament. Helen Shapiro tells that funny story that she went to a bookshop and says, "Can I get a Old Testament?" And the Jewish shopkeeper goes, "How old?" So, but even that communicates something, right? So, being able to talk about their book using their word for it already communicates respect and understanding. And so, but the Jewish people are not necessarily the people of the book; they're the people of many books. And those many books would be the sages who are called the Chazal. And Orthodox like their acronyms. The Chazal is Chachameinu Zichronam Levrcha, which is our sages, may their memory be blessed. And that's the kind of the rabbinical consensus of opinion that flows through Jewish history. And a lot of the Chazal you'd read in the Talmud. We heard about the Talmud, which is a multi-voluminous book of arguments of rabbis disagreeing with each other on just about everything. And so it's basically an insight into a massive argument, and it all got written down. And so these are the great Torah sages of the past. And so because of Judaism's rootedness in the Tanakh, plus rabbinical authorities, we can easily talk at cross purposes with them. It's like we laugh about America and Britain being two countries separated by a common language. You know, we speak English, but then we don't speak the same English. It's very different. You can communicate different things and get yourself into deep water pretty quickly. And so we can talk to Jewish people assuming that the words we use mean the same thing, because, you know, even when you talk about, you know, heaven, you know, it means something else to Jewish people than we would understand. You talk about sin, it means something different. Even the word Messiah, you know, many Orthodox Jews think that there's a potential Messiah in every generation, which is why, I don't know if you know, the Chabad Lubavitch, they believe that their dead Rabbi Mendel Menachem Schneerson was the Mashiach because he was the last person of his dynasty, and he was considered this was the Messiah of his generation. And so they still venerate Yeshua with big Messiah flags, and they celebrated his birthday just recently. So the concept of Messiah, even that is different. And I don't know if you realise, but Orthodox Jews believe in reincarnation. Did you know that? Gilgul HaNefesh, it's called, the circle of the soul. They even believe in something called Dibuk, which is a misplaced soul. You know that somebody dies and their soul can get trapped in somebody else's soul. You know, that kind of spiritual Airbnb in somebody else's soul. You know, so misplaced souls in the wrong body. So it's quite a surprise to Christians, because we think that the people of the book are locked just to the one book that we know about, but it isn't. There's a lot more that's happened. And then you add to this the secularization of a large part of the Jewish people and their adherence to other religious ideologies, New Age being massively popular for Jewish people. You've got famous Jewish Buddhists. You've heard of Jubus, Jewish Buddhists. Leonard Cohen, the late great singer, was a Buddhist monk himself. And so we need to know what Jewish people mean when they speak, and that means we need to listen. And we then have to ensure that they understand what we mean when we use the words that we choose to communicate clearly and accurately what the gospel really is to them. So, I wonder what you think the best argument for Jesus is. It's very interesting to think about that. How do we prove that Jesus is the Messiah in a Jewish context? Think about how Jesus proved himself to be the Messiah. It's quite funny, really, because you'd expect Jesus would have used Isaiah 53, but Jesus never used Isaiah 53. Jesus used the Psalms more often than not. That was his book of choice in the Tanakh. That's what he used. Now, I will go over to this photograph and say the best argument for Jesus is that. It's showing Jesus in a very visceral and meaning way. And this is our missionary in Tel Aviv, Igal Vender, who works amongst the homeless and the drug addicts and the prostitutes on the streets of Tel Aviv. This man hadn't been touched for years. The people just step over these people, and he sits down and they say, "What do you know about our life?" And he just shows them his leg, and they see all the track marks from his heroin injections in his legs, and they go, "Oh." Or he'll meet somebody that had just come out of prison. They remembered him when he was a very violent prisoner himself. And what's happened to you? What's changed? And he can't walk past homeless people. And yet, all the Jewish people on drugs, prostitution. I mean, somebody once said the Jewish people are like everybody else, only more so. And there is an intensification, there's an honesty in Jewish culture and amongst the Jewish people. And there's something very beautiful and very warming about that. But you see the intensification of the tragedy of humanity in Israel on the streets of Tel Aviv. And with the 7th of October, many, many more people are going on the streets, turning to drugs, coping with the tragedy of all that they've gone through and the stress of, ballistic missiles being fired from Iran into civilian centres. And the guy is ministering to these people and showing them, as we say in Yorkshire, the proof of the pudding's in the tasting. And that's what's happened there. So the greatest argument for Jesus is us. How we react, how we reflect Jesus to Jewish people. And when you look at how Jesus used the Old Testament as knacking, he turned to the Psalms. It's ironic that many of the Jewish anti-missionaries try to prove Jesus is not the Messiah, and they have to read the Hebrew Bible like a liberal or Protestant Catholic scholar, and they have to hyper-flatten out all of the prophecies, that there's no chance of future fulfillment, there's no foretelling, there's no supernatural, there is nothing in the future. It can only mean one thing to the one time that it was written. There is no future aspect. And so Isaiah, well, that wasn't Isaiah, that was the school of Isaiah, so many years later, who wrote after the fact. That's how you decide that. All this future prediction wasn't really future prediction, because it was the school of Isaiah that wrote afterwards and attributed to his name. And so that, ironically, Orthodox Jews have to read their Bible like liberal Catholics and Protestants to not see Jesus in it. Because if they read their scriptures like Jewish people, then Jesus would just be jumping out of the pages to them. Asaf and Wim, our missionaries in the Netherlands, often go to Antwerp, which is the big diamond district, very ultra-Orthodox area of Europe. And they go around with a sheet of Isaiah 53. No attribution where it is in Hebrew. So can you read that? Can you tell us where that's from? And they're like, oh yeah, that's from the New Testament, that's about Jesus. And you should see their faces when they find out that it's actually from their scriptures. It is quite a shock. Because without any prejudice, when they read Isaiah 53, Jesus just jumps out of the page to them. But Jesus used the Psalms. You know, the Psalms are very much the head of Judaism. The Torah is the head. The Psalms is the heart. The Psalms are the emotional part. And I said earlier on that, you know, we have to win their heart before we win their head. You win them as people before you win the argument. And so Jesus uses the most emotional book of the Tanakh to prove himself. And so often mission works the other way around. We think that we win the arguments with the proof text and everything before we win the person. But we've got to win the person before we win the argument. And there is no shortcut to the hard work of individual one-to-one redemptive relationships. Let me say that again. Redemptive relationships. That's what we're called to with Jewish people, to be in redemptive relationships with us. Christ in us, the hope of glory. And we need to let Jewish people close enough to see Christ in us, the hope of glory, to see us warts and all, to see our failures but still see Jesus shining through, to see our weakness and see that in our weakness he's strong, to see our failures, to know that through our failures Jesus is glorified. And so often we want to be perfect people, but who wants perfect people in their life? You meet perfect people, makes you feel rubbish about yourself. We want to be about people like us, broken, messed up people, and see the glory of Jesus shining through, despite of all of our failures and imperfections. Why should that be different with Jewish people? And that's why I said at the very beginning, if you're speaking to your most awkward family member, you know that you have to adopt a different approach. So don't think that, you know, stroppy, objectionable, unsocially aware evangelism is going to work with the Jewish person. Just because you shout the odds like a market salesman at a person doesn't mean you effectively preach the gospel. So evangelism, discipleship, two sides of one coin. The Great Commission is about making disciples, not making converts. And so these redemptive relationships are really, really important. And we change the world by changing one heart at a time. And so we need this compassionate contextual evangelism so that we get the right message of Jesus to Jewish people. And then when they respond, we need contextual discipleship. Because let me say, in my work, the easiest thing in the world is seeing Jewish people run for Jesus. That might surprise you. The easiest thing in the world, the biggest challenge is seeing them go on with Jesus and feeding them into a church that values them. And a church that hasn't sweat blood and tears and wept in intercessory prayer for the salvation of a Jewish person. When they come into the church doors, they will not be sensitive, they will not care, and they'll do something stupid that will see them back out that door faster than they came back in. And that is a real challenge for us, having churches that are able to include and make Jewish people feel that even the reading of the New Testament doesn't feel like a Punch and Judy show. When every time somebody says Jews in the Bible reading, everybody feels like they have to boo, Jews, boo. And the Jews did boo, and the Jews did boo. But would we change our Bible translations? Well, churches split just changes the colour of their curtains. How are we going to change Bible translations when you have John's Gospel that talks to the Jews, when the Synoptic Gospels describes the Pharisees and the teachers of the law? And so John is writing primarily to a community that doesn't really understand the difference between the scribes